Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at failure.
Ooh.
Yeah, but not in the way you might think.
Okay.
We're going to be exploring how we can actually embrace failure as a stepping stone to success.
I like it.
Yeah, and to help us unpack this idea, we're going to be looking at an excerpt from this article called Embracing Failure, the Pathway to Success.
Okay, sounds interesting.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And get this, the article kicks off with this line: losing billions of dollars is no big deal.
Wow, that's a bold statement.
Right. It definitely caught my attention, and it got me thinking about like the world of venture capital and those big investments.
Yeah, where they're putting tons of money into startups.
Exactly.
Right.
And there's this understanding that not every investment is going to be a huge win.
Right. It's like built in that some of them are going to fail.
Yeah, so in that world, a billion-dollar loss, it doesn't necessarily mean someone messed up.
It's more about acknowledging that taking big swings is part of the game.
And that sometimes those swings miss? Exactly. But the key is not to be reckless, but to understand that being afraid to lose can actually paralyze us.
So we end up missing out on opportunities for growth.
Yeah, because if we're constantly worried about failing, we might never actually take those chances that could lead to amazing things.
So it's all about finding that balance between recklessness and just staying stuck.
Right, taking calculated risks, knowing that we might not always succeed.
But that even if things don't go as planned, there's still a lesson to be learned.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key concept from the article: successful failure.
Successful failure. I'm not sure I follow.
Yeah, it sounds kind of contradictory.
Right. How can a failure be successful? It's not about celebrating mistakes.
No, it's about recognizing that even big failures, they can provide insights that can lead to future successes.
Okay, that makes a bit more sense. Can you give an example of this successful failure idea?
Sure, think about James Dyson, the guy who invented the bagless vacuum cleaner.
Oh, yeah, of course. I've heard of him.
Well, he went through over 5,000 prototypes
Wow.
before he finally nailed it.
5,000. That's incredible. I can't even imagine how many times he must have felt like he'd failed along the way.
Right. But those 5,000 prototypes, they weren't wasted effort. Each one taught him something.
So it was those failures that led to his big breakthrough.
Exactly. It's like mining for gold. You got to sift through a lot of dirt and rock before you find that nugget.
That's a great analogy. So even when we feel like we're failing, we're actually gathering data, learning, and getting closer to that aha moment.
Absolutely. And speaking of setbacks, the article highlights a powerful example: the Apollo 1 disaster.
Oh, yeah. That was a tragedy that really shook everyone. It was a huge setback for the space program.
A devastating one.
But even in the face of that loss, they learned invaluable lessons.
Lessons about safety, engineering, which ultimately helped them succeed with future missions.
Including landing on the moon?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It shows that even in the darkest moments, there's still potential for growth and progress.
It really makes you think differently about failure. It's not always the end.
Right. It's more about how we respond to it,
Yeah.
how we learn from it, and use those lessons to move forward.
This whole idea of reframing failure is really resonating with me. What if, instead of seeing failure as the enemy, we saw it as a guide?
Yeah, a teacher even, guiding us towards success.
Because if we already know something is going to work, it's not really an experiment.
You got it. True innovation requires us to venture into the unknown, where there's always a chance of things not going as planned.
And the article makes this point perfectly with this quote: "If you know something is going to work, it's not an experiment, it's routine."
So embracing failure is really about embracing that experimental process.
Being willing to explore and discover, even if it means we might stumble along the way. Okay, I'm starting to see things in a new light, but how do we actually make this shift? How do we go from fearing failure to embracing it?
That's a great question, and one we'll dive into more in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore some practical strategies for changing our mindset and turning those setbacks into opportunities for growth.
Awesome. Looking forward to part 2. But before we move on, I want to hear from you, the listeners. What are your initial thoughts on this whole idea of embracing failure? Have you ever experienced a setback that actually led to a breakthrough? Okay, so picking up where we left off, we're really digging into this idea of embracing failure. And in the last part, we talked about how failure isn't always a bad thing.
Right, even big failures can actually be valuable learning experiences.
Exactly. But how do we put this into practice?
Yeah, how do we actually go from understanding it to actually embodying it in our lives?
That's the big question. Where do we even start?
Well, the article offers some really practical strategies. One that I found really helpful is focusing on learning goals instead of just performance goals.
Learning goals versus performance goals. I'm not sure I get the difference.
So performance goals are all about the outcome, like hitting a specific target.
Okay, like, I want to make $1 million this year.
Exactly. Or running a marathon in under 4 hours. Those are
Okay.
performance goals.
Gotcha. Whereas learning goals are more focused on acquiring new knowledge and skills.
Right. It's about the process of growth and development.
So with a learning goal,
Mm-hmm.
the journey is just as important as the destination.
You got it. And even if you don't reach that specific target, you still gained valuable experience.
That you can use later on.
Exactly. For example, say your goal is to write a novel.
Okay. A performance goal would be to get it published.
Right. But a learning goal might be to improve your writing skills.
Or maybe just to finish the first draft.
Exactly. By focusing on the learning aspect, you're taking some of the pressure off the outcome.
And allowing yourself to make mistakes and to grow along the way.
Absolutely. And this is especially important for anything that pushes you out of your comfort zone.
Like starting a business or creative endeavors.
Exactly.
You know, I've always considered myself to be pretty goal-oriented, but maybe I've been too focused on the outcome and not paying enough attention to the process.
I think a lot of us do that. We get so caught up in reaching that next milestone that we forget to enjoy the journey.
Yeah, that makes sense. So setting learning goals is one strategy. What are some others?
Another good one is breaking down big goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
Right, so it feels less overwhelming.
Yeah.
And less scary.
Exactly. Because if you stumble on one small step, you haven't failed the whole thing.
You can just adjust and keep going.
Right. It's like creating mini experiments where each step gives you valuable information.
For the next step.
Exactly. So, for example, say your goal is to start an online business. That can feel huge and overwhelming.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
But if you break it down into smaller steps, like validating your product idea, building a website, marketing, launching your first product.
Suddenly it feels more manageable.
Exactly.
It's like climbing a mountain. You focus on base camps along the way.
I love that analogy. Each base camp is a small victory where you can celebrate your progress.
Okay, so breaking things down makes a lot of sense. But you mentioned resilience earlier, and I think that's super important when facing setbacks.
It's all about reframing, how we perceive those setbacks.
So, if we see every setback as a total failure, we'll get stuck in negativity and self-doubt.
Right, but if we could see them as learning opportunities, as part of the growth process, they become less scary and easier to deal with.
So it's about changing the story we tell ourselves, moving from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset.
Exactly. And this takes time and effort to shift those deeply ingrained thought patterns.
But we can start to see failures as valuable information.
Yes. Information that can help us make better decisions in the future.
This is really making me think about times where I've let fear hold me back.
Right.
And those were often the times with the biggest potential for growth.
It's true. The things that scare us the most can lead to the greatest breakthroughs.
But it takes courage to face that fear and embrace the unknown. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me. I'm starting to see that embracing failure isn't about being careless. It's about having the courage to experiment, to learn from mistakes, and to keep going even when it's tough.
And remember, we're all in this together.
Everyone, every successful person, innovator, leader, has faced setbacks along the way. Failure is not a weakness. It's a sign that you're pushing yourself, that you're striving for something more. That's so reassuring to hear. It makes the whole journey feel less intimidating.
That's what this deep dive is all about. Demystifying failure.
Yeah.
Taking away its power.
And recognizing its value in achieving success. So, for you listening out there, what's one area of your life where you might be holding back because of fear? What's one small step you can take today to embrace that fear and see it as an opportunity to grow?
Take a moment to reflect on that. You don't have to have all the answers right now. It's a process. But even a small step in the right direction can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up this part, I want to touch on something the article didn't directly address: self-compassion.
Oh, that's so important, especially when embracing failure.
It's so easy to be hard on ourselves when we mess up. That inner critic can be so loud, telling us we're not good enough. And that can really hold us back from learning from our experiences.
Exactly. So how do we cultivate self-compassion when facing setbacks?
It starts with recognizing that we're all human. We all make mistakes. And instead of beating ourselves up, we can try to approach them with curiosity and kindness.
Like we would with a friend going through something similar.
Right. We wouldn't tell them their failure. We'd offer support and encouragement.
Exactly. and remind them that everyone makes mistakes.
We need to extend that same compassion to ourselves, give ourselves permission to be imperfect.
To stumble, to fall, knowing that it doesn't diminish our worth.
I love that. Self-compassion is like the fuel. That helps us get back up and keep moving, even when we feel discouraged.
It's about recognizing that failure is not a reflection of who we are, but just part of being human.
And when we embrace that, we free ourselves to take risks, to experiment, to learn, to grow. This conversation has been so insightful. I'm already feeling a shift in my mindset. Failure isn't this scary monster anymore. It's more like a guide on the path to success.
That's the power of reframing. When we change our perspective, we change our reality.
Okay. I'm ready to take this knowledge and put it into action, but before we do, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the role of self-compassion in embracing failure? Have you found any strategies that help you to be kinder to yourself when you make mistakes? Welcome back to our deep dive on embracing failure. We've talked about reframing our mindset, setting learning goals, breaking down big goals, and the importance of self-compassion.
Right, all key ingredients
Yeah.
for turning those setbacks into stepping stones.
Exactly. But now let's get tactical. How do we actually apply all this to our daily lives?
Because knowing the theory is one thing, but actually putting it into practice, especially when things get tough.
Yeah, that's a real challenge. So what are some concrete actions we can take?
One strategy I really like is creating a failure resume.
A failure resume. Okay, I'm intrigued. I've never heard of that.
It's basically a document where you list out your failures, your setbacks, your mistakes.
Okay. But the key is you don't just list them, you analyze them.
Right. You ask yourself, what did I learn from this? How did it shape me? What would I do differently next time?
So it's like turning those failures into data points that we can use to make better decisions.
Exactly. And by writing it down, you're kind of externalizing those experiences, taking away their power, and turning them into learning opportunities.
It's like turning those so-called failures into assets. I like that.
And you can even share your failure resume with others.
Really? Why would you do that?
It can be a way to connect with people, to build trust, and to normalize failure.
Because let's face it, failure is something we all experience.
Right. It's not the exception. It's the rule.
But we often don't talk about it. There's so much shame around it.
Exactly. So by sharing our failures, we realize we're not alone.
And those experiences can actually be valuable to others.
Exactly. Another strategy is to surround yourself with people who embrace failure.
People who are willing to take risks, to experiment, to learn from their mistakes.
To support each other through those ups and downs.
Because the people we spend time with, they really influence our mindset.
Right. If you're around people who are afraid to fail, who play it safe, it'll be harder for you to embrace failure too.
But if you're surrounded by people who see failure as a part of growth, who celebrate each other's successes,
and support each other through setbacks.
that creates a much better environment for innovation and growth.
Absolutely. It's also important to find role models who embody this idea.
People who have achieved great things, but haven't been afraid to stumble along the way.
Exactly. Reading biographies,
Yeah.
listening to podcasts, watching documentaries about their journeys can be so inspiring.
Because you see that even the most successful people have faced challenges and made mistakes.
But they didn't let those experiences define them. They learned, they adapted, and they kept going.
You know, this whole conversation has made me rethink my definition of success. I used to think it was about being perfect, about never messing up. But now I realize true success is about having the courage to try, to learn, and to grow, even when we face setbacks.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and it's a message we all need to hear.
Because it's easy to feel like we're not good enough if we make mistakes, especially in a world that often celebrates perfection. But the truth is, our imperfections, our failures,
They're what make us human, they're what make us unique, and they're what allow us to grow and evolve.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. What's one area of your life where you're holding back because of fear? What's one small step you can take today to embrace that fear and see it as an opportunity? Maybe it's starting that failure resume, or finding a new role model, or just talking to someone you admire about their experiences with failure. Whatever it is, I encourage you to take that step. Embrace the challenge, and remember, the most rewarding journeys are often those that involve a few stumbles along the way.
Because, like we learned from the article, failure is not the opposite of success. It's a foundation of it.